is Eric Miscoll, publisher of EMS Now, and welcome to this edition of the virtual Eric Miscoll Show. We appreciate all of you joining in and taking time out of your day to listen to our discussion today. As always, I'm joined by Phil Stoten, my co-host from Scoop. Phil, always good to collaborate. Thanks for staying up till 1 a.m. there in Australia to do this.
Pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Taking one for the team, as we say.
Absolutely.
As always, all the listeners will be on mute. If you have questions you wish to pose to the panel, we encourage you to do so using the question option at the bottom of the screen. And this session is being recorded and will be rebroadcasted on EMS Now within the week, possibly end of week or beginning of next week. The focus of our discussion today is on digital transformation and its impact on the EMS industry. So to help us in that, we've invited two people who I think have good experience and can speak to this issue. We have Michael Ford, the Senior Director of Emerging Industry Strategy with Aegis Software, and also Rajeev Bhalla, who's the founder and CEO of Clip Automation. Welcome to you both, and thank you for your participation today. To begin, I gave a brief introduction, but I'm going to allow each of you to introduce yourselves and your companies for the benefit of our audience. So, Michael, why don't we begin with you, sir?
Okay, Michael Ford. Yeah, I've been with Aegis Software now for about 3 or 4 years, though I'm a kind of a veteran in the industry in terms of the application of computers for manufacturing. So I think I'm in my 33rd or 34th year for that now. So, you know, pretty much seen it all and done it all. But with Aegis, of course, we're focusing on manufacturing execution and not just the ordinary stuff, but actually IIoT-driven MES, so a whole new technology for a whole new digital age. And so, you know, for me, I'm partially doing marketing role, but also partially looking at industry standards and innovations going forward.
Very good. And Rajeev?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Rajeev Bhalla. I'm the founder and CEO of Clip Automation. Clip is focused on digital transformation in EMS and manufacturing space, specifically in the automation and production areas. Prior to this, I was at Jewel Labs. I was VP of Operations. And before that, I was at Apple for 6 years. Nice to be on the show. Thanks, Eric.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome both. Before we get into the issue of the day, the digital transformation, I just want to ask you each to maybe tell us the impact that this pandemic that we're all still struggling through has had on your operations and maybe where it stands today. It looks like both of you are in your bunkers there still. So, you know, Rajeev, why don't we start with you? How's this been and with Clip?
I think COVID's definitely slowed things down, specifically with Asia, right? Interactions with companies in Southeast Asia, with China, with Singapore, Taiwan and Japan, they've been slow. It's hard to initiate new things, and it's also hard to close off existing deals because what's starting to happen is just the normal transactional things that need to occur that require interaction are harder. On the flip side, I think there's a huge uptick on what's happening in the United States. I think there's a lot of activity, and then there's a third, so there's uptick in the US, it's hard to do things in China, but then the third effect that's starting to happen is we're also seeing Chinese and Southeast Asian companies taking a much greater interest because of not just COVID, but other geopolitical reasons in what's happening in the United States and how they can participate more in not just manufacturing in Southeast Asia, but how can they participate in Southeast Asian companies doing business in the United States? So how do they increase their America's North and South footprint by being local here? So we're definitely seeing a shift in things.
Yeah. Very interesting. Michael, how's it in your neck of the woods?
It's a very interesting situation, actually, because I think the biggest impact of COVID, and not just COVID, but also the geopolitical situation, is that it really has started to polarize companies and people in terms of their future.
Yeah.
And this is driven through uncertainty. You know, normally people, you know, companies have a business plan, they have a roadmap for products, a roadmap for technologies, and it's all pretty much set out for the next few years. Unfortunately, we don't know how things are going to go in the next few years. And so what we've seen is this polarization where some companies are saying, right, I'm going to reduce my exposure to this by reducing costs, reducing risk. You know, I'm possibly thinking about what to do with people, furloughing as they are in the UK for some people. Whereas others are saying, this is a change, and any change represents opportunity. And we're seeing companies like, you know, we've got cases here in the UK where companies have adopted a digital best practice, who've already gone to this level of digitalization and have said, well, look, I want to switch my manufacturing from aerospace to medical. And actually one company won the UK Ventilator Challenge because they were able to switch so quickly. And they realized that the product itself isn't physically that much different. It's the way in which you have the accreditations that are completely different. But if what you're doing in production satisfies all accreditations, there's no problem. And so we're seeing people realize the benefits of that digitalization. So there are the people who understand that and see it as the opportunity versus the people who are still waiting to see what's going to happen. And it's interesting to see those different perspectives and how that translates into their business plans going forward into the future.
Yeah, so people are reassessing, some people are reassessing their business models, some people are reassessing their digital strategies, as Rajeev said, some people are reassessing their whole geography in terms of their business. Do you see this as trends that were happening anyway and that COVID is just accelerating, or is it actually creating a change in direction? Rajeev, do you see new questions being asked rather than people moving forward more quickly?
I think one of the things that COVID has highlighted that is forcing companies to reassess their entire manufacturing strategy is how brittle and fragile their supply chain really is. Mm. And, you know, there's no, and if people understand how hard it is to actually move materials from China to the United States, simple things that should not be affected, there should be no shortage of. There are month-long waiting lists, and you're not able to buy things that that should have no correlation, but just because of the way the supply chains work and how efficient and lean companies have made them. What's happened is if there's one single hiccup anywhere in that line, it affects everyone downstream. And we're definitely seeing that. So if you go into stores, electronic stores, consumer stores, bicycle stores, I was trying to buy a bicycle for my daughter who's turning 12, and they're completely sold out through February on some models of bicycles.
Oh.
And you'd think, well, why would that be? Because the companies, even though it's here in California, some critical components are coming out of factories in China, and they just cannot get them. So you're definitely seeing this everywhere in what we're doing. And I think that's definitely highlighted, COVID's definitely highlighted how fragile and brittle our supply chains truly are. And that kind of compounds the whole situation.
And what does that mean what does that mean for Clip Automation? What does it mean people are asking you for? What are you able to do to help people respond to that?
I think two things are happening, which has been a very positive trend for us. The first is we're being approached by companies in Southeast Asia and China saying, hey, we're not able to transact our normal operations with our partners in the United States. In some cases, our customers, in some cases, our development partners, and in other cases, we can't support machines that are out there. So we're seeing companies reach out to us and saying, hey, is there an opportunity for us to work with you where you can help us in the United States. So that's definitely happening. And that's us as an automation and system integration business. The second thing that's happening is small to mid-size American companies that would traditionally not consider outsourcing in the United States, not because they can't, but because they don't know how. They're now starting to say, well, it's a lot harder for me to initiate business dealings in China. I can't go there. I can't meet them. I can't get my developers online. And I'm looking for somebody who's going to help me through prototyping, through pilot development, through NPI. And we're seeing a lot more of that activity coming out of the United States locally. Okay. And there is work. There's actually more work because they're log jammed. But they're also trying to figure out, how do I get traction and move it forward?
Yeah. What about you, Michael? What are these changes in terms of demand actually mean to Aegis, and how are Aegis responding?
To be honest, the problems that people are facing have been brought on by themselves. I mean, going to Rajeev's point about the supply chain, looking back, hindsight is wonderful, but to create such a dependency on something over which you have ultimately no control is just ridiculous. But people have been accepting step by step increasing risk, and through that streamlining and making a process lean, they think they're getting, shaving cents off the dollar every time, and they're thinking that's great, but forgetting that this thing could happen. So, we've been warned about pandemics for a long time. We've known that there's going to be friction with geopolitical activities, etc. We know this. It should be factored into everybody's long-term business plan, but it hasn't been. It hasn't been seriously. So people are getting, a little bit put out about that. And of course, they rush to technology for the answer. Because, okay, what are they going to do now? How do we relocate manufacturing? How do we reestablish supply chains? How do we prevent counterfeit that seems to have gone up a lot recently, taking advantage of the shortage of materials and all of the quality issues that entails? And, how do we make our factories capable of making any time in any quantity anywhere? Just make whatever the customer needs, because you mentioned the bicycles. Well, I'm guessing the business plan for that bicycle company was not anticipating COVID. They were happy to trundle along and sell what they could sell, but then suddenly everybody's going out cycling, so the demand goes up steeply. So companies now realize that the trend in what people want is changing. And this is not just a short-term thing with bicycles and cars, but it's also going to be long-term. We're going to look for different types of products, maybe something more sustainable, maybe something more environmentally friendly, the electric car rather than the petrol car. We knew these trends were happening, but actually now they're happening far, far quicker because it's brought to people's attention in a very significant way. So as well as people forgetting about the risk, they're now facing this prospect of uncertainty going forward. How digital manufacturing comes in is very, very simple. And this is what we're hearing from customers right now. They want to be ready for anything. They want to be the ones who are ready to take the challenge, ready to accept the opportunities, and come out of this. I mean, hopefully we'll come out of this soon, with a success story.
Yeah, and they want to be in a better state for the next crisis, regardless of what that crisis may be.
For the next.
So we've got, yeah, absolutely. So we've got an acceleration in digital transformation. We've got challenges to the fundamentals of the business, which puts a little bit of pressure on their investment. Are they kind of counteracting each other? People want to move to, in your case, Rajeev, more automation. In your case, Michael, more digital transformation of their MES, but they're getting board pressure to be a bit more cautious with CapEx. Is that a difficult compromise that you're hearing about? Rajeev, you're nodding and gazing into the middle distance. Do you agree? Or
I agree. I think, but two things, Philip. So I agree with that. First of all, I think there's a compelling need to react. And to Michael's point earlier, the problem is companies are reacting. and they're reacting post-event when they could have been acting pre-event. Now, that's our reality. And the fact that everybody has made things so lean that, you know, one or two critical components in their supply chain disrupt their entire capability to exist is something that, you know, everybody chases the dollar. And in another show you and I did, Philip, you mentioned how everybody chases the dollar and goes for the lowest cost manufacturing. Yeah. And the challenge with this is that's the default assumption case. That's how people act. And you have to trade off that efficiency and leanness in your supply chain, which becomes more and more brittle, and it breaks very easily, versus a more flexible supply chain where maybe you have second sources and they're not from the same area geographically in China. They're from other countries, or you have local sources and you're doing some 80-20 split across them and managing that. That kind of flexibility is harder, it's more expensive, it's more work. But, you know, companies that are nimble and are going to be able to affect change in their management approach to this are going to make it. And you know, my sense is there is a very quiet mass extinction event occurring right now. Digital transformation is driving this anyway, because you're going to be able to compete or not. But COVID is a massive accelerant, because it's like, oh, and there's a global recession that may or may not be happening, depending on how our politicians want to portray that news. But it's happening, right? Yeah. People are consuming less. People are buying less. They're eating out less. They don't need as much. They're traveling less. Hotels, entertainment, and consumption is down globally. And it's trickling into everything.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was definitely having an impact on investment. When I talk to CEOs, that's one of their concerns. And in a recent survey I saw of 200 plus manufacturers, 87% said that digital transformation was their highest priority in terms of manufacturing, but only 14% believed their digital transformation was properly funded. So there's a real issue there in terms of imbalance. What do you see, Michael?
The real interesting thing is about the governments, because money has never been so cheap. I mean, interest rates are basically zero, at least for me. So, you know, there is the opportunity to invest if you have confidence. Now, how do you get confidence? And, you know, governments, certainly in Europe anyway, they're providing incentive, you know, toward greener technologies, toward energy conservation, the environment, and these kinds of things, almost like a distraction from the kind of slowdown economically. But I think people, where they know that each dollar that they invest is going to yield a profit, it's not going to be a problem. So what you've got to think about is, what products do I need to make for my customers, and how best to make those, and in what environment do I need to make those? So the real focus is on waste, because nobody wants to make a mistake. Nobody wants to invest in something that's not going to pay off. So, you know, when we come to digitalization, for example, and you know, people are saying, well, you know, I need to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to make these machines talk to each other. No, no, because that doesn't make value. What I really need is my automation to be smart, my software to be smart, put the two together and deliver me that business benefit. So they've got to find ways of doing that in cost-effective ways. Now, the hardware side, you're getting some extremely clever hardware, and that is really stepping up to do what is intended. The difficulty is how to use that hardware effectively. And so that's where the digitalization comes in. But again, people don't want to pay a lot of money for something that they're not sure about. And so the initiatives that, you know, we've put together, helping with IPC's Connected Factory Exchange, and now with the digital twin, brings a whole new level of interoperability, not just for data collection, but of interaction of business systems, so that for free, you can start to connect these things together and create value. So it's not like we're going to have complete automation day one, but it enables people to, put forward a roadmap where successively they can start to build these automations together with smart software and start to achieve goals that yield revenues, yield profits. And when they're confident in doing that, they can continue that investment.
Yeah. So you've got to have a compelling ROI model.
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely.
Eric.
You gentlemen, you raised a lot of good issues here. I mean, you mentioned the digital twins just then, Michael, which is an issue I think we should talk about. And but step back and look at the EMS industry, and I guess I'm interested in hearing how you would assess their path towards digitalization. Kind of, where do you think it is right now? How far along is the industry as a whole? I'm sure there's different stories, obviously. And what might be what are the inhibitors to it for the industry?
For me, the approach needs to be turned upside down. because really EMS companies, they are the ones who led the change into the Far East, the lower cost geographies. They are the ones I feel are responsible for now reacting in a different way, bringing things back. They have the flexibility. They have the number of customers to support. It reduces their risk substantially. Okay, supply chain may be an issue, but basically they can spread the cost and risk. So, I really see that the EMS providers are responsible for that. However, what needs to be turned upside down is that previously they operated with a customer God system, where every customer was their God. They provided a set specification, line configuration, everything specific to that customer. Whatever that customer wanted or didn't want, that would be what they got. Of changing from one customer to another became very high because each line is dedicated to that customer's profile. The customer reduces their quantities, for example, and you want to move that to a different line configuration. You have to swap things around in a very significant way in order to realize that. The alternative approach is to use digital best practice, the same practice everywhere. So you say to your customers, look, I understand here the requirements. Maybe you want traceability on this, this, and this. Guess what? I'm going to give you traceability on everything. That's included in the cost. And you know what? It's actually cheaper now because I have a standard operating practice that I do as an excellence of operation for all of my customers. And so whether you're military, aerospace, medical, automotive, it doesn't matter. The technologies that I'm using within manufacturing fit everything perfectly. And so that is how you have a factory as an engine that can make any product, any time, in any quantity for any customer, basically. So this is
Michael,
I think, for many.
Michael, do you think the pandemic's been a massive wake-up call for the EMS industry to get on with this digital transformation, and they've been dragging their heels for a while?
Well, if it hasn't been, I'd like to sharpen a stick and really point at them. They really should be. Because, before the pandemic, I visited a few contract manufacturers, small ones in the US, and I was just dismayed at their pessimism. Everything will go out to China. Yeah, we're going to do prototypes, but then it goes out to China. I said, look, you know about this reshoring, you know about these political problems. What if Mr. Apple or somebody like that came along and said, guys, we would like you to make our products? Yeah. And the answers just go white. Volume, quantities, supply chain. You need to be ready for that. Okay, probably won't be a company as big as that, but that is what you need to be prepared for.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
We're going to succeed.
I think, Eric, your question was you asked, what needs to change in the EMS industry for the future. I think this is a fundamental management approach and strategy issue. right? If we look at, and we were talking about investments, and it comes down to, your point about 87% of the companies are doing it, but only 14% of them are actually putting the right amount. There's a simple model. Large companies tend to use this, but what I would want companies to do is use like a 70-20-10 model, which is invest or spend 70% of your time, monies in managing your day-to-day business. That's what you need to do to survive through this. Whether it's COVID, through transformation, you're supporting your business. And then 20% of your monies and investments and energy should be focused on continuous improvement. How do I improve what I currently do and make it incrementally better? But there's a 10%.
Yeah.
That needs to be focused on disruptive investment. And that cannot be business as usual. That can't be system normal. That is the kind of investment that would enable companies to anticipate what Michael's talking about. Like, hey, we know this is coming. And yet we're spending 100% of our time and money on, day-to-day operations. And companies that are not focusing. So Google has some numbers on this, right? If you look at all of their, little Google bets, right? They're all 10% bets, right? And they're willing to turn them on and they're willing to turn them off.
Yeah.
And the fact that large companies do that systemically, or very large companies are able to do that, I mean, they're nimble and they're able to adapt and thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And companies that don't do that, I don't want to use, we're talking about digital transformation, so I feel like Kodak comes to mind for some. Kodak, they knew, and they had some great digital transformation technology when it came to digital photography. But they were so stuck on selling media that they didn't want to switch. So even though they were spending 10% on, hey, how do we get into digital cameras? And they had products out there. They were so stuck on monetizing their media and print business, the film and print business, that they were never able to transition. And organizations that cannot basically cannibalize and pivot their model and invest in that 10%, they're the ones who are going to struggle. And COVID only accelerates this kind of activity because suddenly it's a cliff. You can't operate on slim margins anymore.
Well, and Rajeev, but that's the issue with the EMS industry, or slim margins, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned Google being able to do it. Of course, they have the luxury, so to speak, to do that.
Yeah.
EMS, for the most part, are on those razor thin margins where, I love the model, the 70-20-10, and it seems like, well, not just in times of pandemic and crisis, but it's right strategy. But
70-10-20.
70-20-10, yeah. So
more money for disruption.
But this is all talking also about kind of the term software-defined manufacturing, right? And how that model plays into it here, because I think there's, the question is, can EMS change and adopt? Some can, right? And you would think that maybe some smaller, nimble ones could. I don't, it's harder to turn a big ship sometimes. But so I'm wondering if on the software-defined manufacturing, and there's new platforms coming out about that. What is it? Macrofab, I believe, is one example.
You mean manufacturing as a service?
That's manufacturing as a service, excuse me, right?
Yeah, the ecosystems. Yeah.
Those types of models are interesting, and they're changing.
Disruptive.
And allowing. So how do you see those playing here? And Michael, I cut you off there. I'm sorry. So I'll start with you. So
okay. The structure has to change a little bit. And I always, I've been telling a kind of strange story over the last few years whereby, in order to get reshoring, we have to manufacture close to the customer. If we manufacture close to the customer, we end up making more product. We decrease that distribution chain. So we're almost like direct shipping from a factory. So imagine Los Angeles. You had a factory that was making products for Los Angeles. Everything that anybody wanted was made in that factory for Los Angeles. You went online in the day, you order it from the factory, it's delivered tomorrow. Absolute minimal stock. And it's just in time from the factory to the customer, direct shipping. And what would the factory look like in order to be able to provide that level of flexibility so that it was taking raw demand day by day? Now, it sounds a bit crazy that you would have one factory building absolutely everything, so many different products, so many different variations. But actually, that's the extreme position of the trend that's currently been happening over the last 20 or 30 years. So if you can think of a solution for the extreme, I mean, this is getting into scientific mode now, then you can at least have pointers toward where you're going. And so that extreme case demands extreme flexibility. And that demands digital control of manufacturing. And this is what Industry 4.0 has been all about for the last 5 years that nobody really has taken up or really understood.
I reckon it's 7 or 8 now, Michael.
But it really shows that we need to be thinking in a way that EMS is going to reinvent themselves to become that type of company that is ultra flexible, ultra resourceful. It's going to pioneer the work in new technologies like 3D printing, being able to manufacture key components locally, to go back to what we used to do years and years ago of having key companies in the supply chain located right next to us and not on the other side of the planet. So it's going to reinforce a kind of combination between the quick thinking world of today, which is aided digitally, but also combined with supply chain, which is going to be run digitally. But going back to those core values, those core manufacturing economics that we learned as kids that we somehow forgot, but the people who remember them real quick are going to be the ones who actually start to succeed, because they're going to realize that I'm not going to go to the end of this crazy story with a one factory for Los Angeles, but I know I'm going to have to go a certain point that remains practical, and I need to understand how I'm going to operate that.
It's kind of interesting, right? EMS has to change their strategy, but I think, you know, Eric, your point about the margins is ultimately the overriding driving force. It'll always come back to cost and margins. And you take large multinationals like Apple, right? They're talking about moving their manufacturing. They're not talking, everybody else is talking about how they're moving their manufacturing outside of China. And now they're going to make iPhone 12s in India, in Bangalore, right? And here's the thing, you know, that's not reshoring.
No.
They're still, well, you know, and from a China standpoint, it is. But what's actually happening is what they're doing is they're able to move, you know, that's largely driven by the Indian government forcing them. Yeah. You know, if they want to access the market, they're going to have to do this here. So what's actually happening is the driver, and then now they're saying, okay, so there's all kinds of incentives. There's free lands. We're going to give you acres, and, you know, and we're going to help you with the supply chain. There was this whole make in India, manufacture in India thing. And so there's a lot of incentivization. But, you know, I think, you know, in the United States, in Latin America, in South America, in Europe, you know, for countries to actually reshore and protect their industry, we have to get away from the really large ones like Apple, who are going to figure it out and who have the kind of clout to move governments and you know, or Tesla, for example, right? Tesla is able to say, okay, well, in order to sell to Europe, we're going to create Giga Berlin and we're going to create Shanghai. Small to mid-sized businesses are not going to have that kind of clout, geopolitical or otherwise, to affect large-scale industries. So we have these large, you know, outliers, but it's really the small to mid-sized businesses that are affected the most. And I think it has to somehow be supported through policy as well. It can't just be good luck, I hope you guys make it, and we're going to donate money to our favorite political friends. You know, I don't know how this trickles down to the small to mid-sized businesses from an ecosystem standpoint?
No, I'm really, a couple of really interesting elements there to unpack. First of all, Michael's made in utopia model, or made in Los Angeles, as he gave us the example. But also your model of incentives, I think, is really interesting. The question I want to ask you both is, Michael Ford for president or Rajeev Bhalla for president, if you're doing that and you're laying out your policy, what is your manufacturing incentive policy? Because I've been listening to the incentive policies that are being thrown around by the various parties in the US election, but also seeing what's going on in Japan in terms of incentives to move supply chains. And a lot of the talk is around tariffs, is around tax breaks, and is around all those kind of things. And I've been talking to officials here in Australia and different organizations. And I feel very strongly that we need to incentivize digital transformation in some way. There needs to be investment in that, and just throwing money randomly at creating short-term jobs isn't the solution. So if either of you guys get to run for office, then how would you incentivize manufacturing that would advantage those locations? Who's brave enough to take that one first?
I'll take the first shot, Michael, if that's okay.
Go on.
I think in the US, if I view it as to what we were talking about earlier, which is it's an investment or lack of investment, it would be in the form of tax amnesties or incentives from the government, specifically towards R&D and towards investments in non-product technology, right? All of manufacturing and production focuses on cost reduction and efficiency improvements. And I think that's the right path, right? That, to me, that's the 20%. But how do we take something and we say, okay, it's a greenfield, and what are we going to do? And let's say there's no ROI, right? And the reality is, we have to be willing to fail. And if we're running so lean that we can't afford to fail, we definitely can't afford to succeed either dramatically, right? We're just making do. We're just, we're surviving. And I think that has to occur at the top, and it has to trickle down, not to large companies who reap the bulk of the benefit of all of these, but it has to really happen at a grassroots small business level. The 1 person, 2 person, 5, 10, 100-person company that's out there that's actually servicing a local economy, not a global economy.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, I realize, like me, your passport stops you from running for president, but if you could.
Yeah, there's 2 things that I would do, and they're quite different. The first thing is send everybody back to business school, because they clearly need to learn. If you look, I think it was even Apple who claimed that the cost of manufacturing itself is like 1, 2, 3% of the actual final product cost. So actually, manufacturing cost isn't significant at all. So you could multiply that cost by 3 or 4 times by manufacturing in the US, and it wouldn't have a negative impact on the final price. I mean, everybody gets these things at a discount these days. So instead of trying to manufacture on the cheap, invest in manufacturing. Buy the proper equipment to do it properly in the place you want to do it. Invest in the automation, invest in the digitalization, and get your pricing down. And it's not going to be a net cost, because manufacturing closer to the customer, your distribution costs are less, that lead time between the factory and the customer with all the price depreciation that happens, that's eliminated. That more than compensates for a decent investment in manufacturing. So go back to business school, learn that, and let's see what we can do. I may be wrong, but I think that's a pretty good start.
I want to point out my father, God rest his soul, who was an international banker, was always fond to point out that the world is training more people in MBA programs than ever before in history. and that we arguably have the worst management at any time in history at the same time. So, going back to business school, maybe going back to basics, but be careful with the business schools.
So the second thing, at the moment, people are being forced to go into this digitalization area, and they believe that through the use of data, they're going to bring all kinds of benefits to manufacturing, quality, throughput, on-time delivery, flexibility, agility. The list just goes on. And I believe they're all quite genuine. The problem is that we're all going about it separately. We're all paying for the R&D cost. We're all paying for that pain of the learning curve. We're all paying individually. When we started with circuit board technology, with surface mount technology, we started to share the information about the technology. I think going back to IPC, as I always do, but here is an opportunity whereby people are getting together and creating technology that isn't conflicting in terms of IP in any way, shape, or form, but is providing the ability to quickly learn and ascend to the level where you can get the data. Once you've got the data, you can buy whatever tool you like or use the data in any way you like. That's absolutely fine. But we shouldn't all be wasting time spinning our wheels financially, hemorrhaging money on trying to develop this technology when actually we could all develop it in a standard way, using things like CFX and the digital twin. That's what these things are there for. Digital twin is not the name of somebody's solution, which is actually what you see all over the internet. Digital twin this, digital twin that. It's basically just another name for my software algorithm. That's all it is. The true digital twin is that frame of interoperability where hardware vendors and software vendors can exchange data, not just shop floor data, but data about the holistic business from product, manufacturing, and life cycle of products to share it globally so that they've got access to that data, so that whatever digitalization tools they choose to buy, which are the added value tools, they have the return on investment according to that money they've spent. They're not investing in this spinning wheel activity of just trying to. So we need a national or international approach to this, whereby we can get the small and medium enterprise companies, or the backbone of the US and of many countries in Europe. We need to get them up to speed. They will not be able to do it by themselves. They cannot afford to make those investments and learn by themselves. They need help. And if the government can provide the incentive to show, by proof of concept, to show by funding certain projects to act as education, to develop these standards and to apply them, I believe that that will really give a huge impact in a positive way to the confidence and the ability for small and medium enterprises to gain that advantage that digital age promises.
Michael, the challenge I see in that approach is, I think it requires a planned, structured response across many, many, many industries and many, many, many companies across many, many, many countries. And the challenges, and it's why digital transformation, right? You said 5 years, and as Philip said, it's actually been longer, right? 9 years. And we're talking about transformation 4.0, and of course there's companies still in 3.0 land, and then of course there's companies, and Philip and I have this joke where we're talking about 5.0, but the reality is I don't see it as being possible for EMS as an industry to drive this as a structured, planned activity. Because if it could have been, it would have evolved. It would have already happened. Now, what has happened is there are some countries, like if you, and I'm generalizing, but if you look at Japan or Germany, there are countries that are trying to take this approach. And they've been geographically and through incentivization, through company pride, through localization, as you've said, they've been able to achieve this. But the counter to that is a healthy self-interest towards a quarterly bottom line that prevents this R&D and capital expenditure infrastructure spend that is not immediately quantifiable. You know, and so I think there has to be, you know, and it'll come back, and it's unfortunate because I don't see it happening from the government, because there's no scenario where I expect the government to have a better response or a more nimble response than localized industry. But at the same time, through the incentivization that Philip was talking about, right, it may be able to create a broad spectrum strategy that enables this to happen. And I think that's really what we would benefit from.
Yeah, you got to keep your eye on the prize though, because, you know, I've estimated that between 20 and 30 billion dollars is going to be spent if we were to take all of the factories in the world and turn them into smart factories, just considering the cost of connection of machines. 20 to 30 billion dollars worth of investment industry-wide.
Yeah.
We start then to add the interoperability of business systems, like within the digital twin. Without a structured digital twin, it's another 30 or 40 billion dollars. Is there not incentive there? Because you look at the biggest companies, like the big EMS players and the big OEMs, they do have these projects ongoing. Some of them have been better than others, but they are actually picking up speed now. But the medium-sized and smaller companies, they don't. They don't have resources to do this. And the backbone of local manufacturing is based on smaller companies, smaller EMS companies, as well as OEMs. This gap is beginning to explode quietly because nobody's talking about it. You know, the big companies don't want to show that they've got one system that runs their whole enterprise worldwide with 30 or 40 different plants, but it exists. There are control rooms, screens everywhere. It's more than NASA in terms of being able to monitor every piece of material on every circuit board anywhere in the world. It's existing right now. And the small companies need to catch up. They need to be able to take advantage of that kind of technology, but they can't do it.
You know, unfortunately, I'm going to have to start wrapping us here. This is fascinating.
You're singing, huh?
There's so many issues. But let me ask, because I like the focus, and both you gentlemen have talked about the small to medium size. So let me ask and end my last question with, to those companies specifically, what one thing would you advise them then for small, medium-sized ones to, you know, to take your sharp stick, Michael, and nudge them forward in digitalization? What would be your one piece of advice, or, you know, to them to move them along and get them going here, knowing we can't get to the full utopia that you described just yet? And maybe start with you, Michael.
Yeah, I would say basically listen to what Rajeev has just said. The 2010 rule is the best way forward, because they do have to take care of the bottom line. But beyond that, they have to look at, instead of just figuring out how to survive and being cautious, they need to take a cautious look at being optimistic and figuring out what will it take to get success here. How do I grow and expand my business? How do I get into a position where I know where the market's going? Because the opportunities are massive. Because some companies are going to fail and disappear. Other companies are going to double, triple, or quadruple in size within a couple of years. How to be one of those growing companies? The C-level people within these companies need to understand that. Understand that, yeah, there are a lot of pitfalls out there. There are a lot of things to be careful about when embracing these new technologies. Sometimes it can become unexpectedly expensive, and sometimes you can waste a lot of money. So you have to get help and guidance from organizations and companies that you respect, because there are case studies out there. Again, they're very quiet because people want to, obviously, if they're succeeding, they just want to get on with it. But there are a lot of success stories waiting to be written. And they need to make sure that they are the authors of those and not just waiting to see what happens, because they will never stop waiting. So have a positive outlook, figure out where they want to be, and get proper help and advice.
Rajeev, how about you, sir?
You know, Eric, there's a FEMA statistic. So FEMA is a disaster management, the Federal Emergency Disaster Management Agency in the United States. There's an agency, and they have a statistic that says after a natural calamity or disaster, 40% of businesses within 1 year fail. Now, this is a great show, Eric, because we've got Michael from the UK, I'm in the US, Philip's in Australia. We're truly global here, right? So I'm sharing a US number, and it's this 40% is not tied to EMS, but all businesses. So it could be a restaurant, could be all businesses. But we're in a similar situation, right? We have a transformation and an industry that is being massively disrupted. And the early adopters are struggling and failing, but the ones that are succeeding massively. Then we have COVID, which has accelerated that extinction event. And a lot of companies are going to struggle to come through this if they're not able to adapt and change. I think for small to mid-sized businesses to come through this successfully, I think they have to take a very hard look at, are they just surviving? And are they just trying to squeak through with business as usual? Or are they actually finding ways where they can thrive? And in this adversity, they can actually improve and thrive. And it requires a mindset change first. And if they're willing to explore those opportunities, I think that's the first step. And it's hard to find partners because the ecosystems aren't there. But I think that's where other small to mid, but there's tremendous opportunity. And I think that's where the first step has to be, is they have to explore laterally. And that can't be, let's go to Shenzhen and see if we can find somebody who can help me out with my product.
Right.
Yeah, there's more to it there. I think what you identify is there are some fundamental challenges to the EMS business model, and we need to be aware of those. And this crisis has really exposed some of those issues and exposed some of the shortcomings in terms of investments. The other thing I would say in wrapping up and listening to what you gentlemen have been saying is this idea of disrupt or be disrupted. And it feels like we're fundamentally at that moment. You have to be bold right now. And it's a tough time to be bold because everything is saying protect, be cautious, look after what we've got. And like you say, it's that 70% of your time making sure you're in business next year. But you need to look forward in a bold way. You need to look forward in a disruptive way because other people are. And the business that we're in now will be very different in a couple of years' time. So yeah, I would say fundamentally get out there, shake things up, make changes and make the right investments.
Yeah. And as I heard somebody say recently, that if the pandemic isn't a catalyst for change, what is, right?
What is?
This is it for us. So.
What does it take?
Yeah, exactly. Listen, we're going to have to wrap here, gentlemen. I'm sorry. Hopefully, maybe we get you all back again sometime and continue the conversation. Michael and Rajeev, thank you, gentlemen, both. This has been fascinating. This is, and I'm sure our audience appreciates your thoughts and insights. Philip, to you too, sir. Thank you as always. For the audience, I'll just remind you, we're doing these shows twice a month. Please join in. Once you register, you'll be updated on these. Look for the next ones. I think the next one is on Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. We're doing a panel to get an update on what's happening down in Mexico. This issue of digital transformation will continue, though, and comes up in all of our shows. So we'll keep talking about it. And I will end as I do now with the saying I tell my kids when they leave the house every time, which is, be smart, be safe, and be sexy. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Thanks a lot.